So it kicks off with our favorite Nazi killing machine, William B.J. Blazkowicz, and he's working as a covert operative for the OSA, the Office of Secret Actions, and right at the start of the game on a German battleship, he gets his hands on this unnatural medallion that's buzzing with supernatural power. They figure out that the Nazis have taken complete control over this fictional German town called Eisenstadt, and they aren't just there to drink beer and eat bratwurst, they're there to mine some rare crystals. They need these crystals to access an alternate dimension known as the Black Sun, which is basically this f***ed up dark reality filled with endless energy. So the OSA sends BJ to figure out what the hell's going on, stop the excavation, and basically shoot anything that gets in the way. And look, to be honest, the plot itself is total B-movie nonsense, but it's exactly the kind of pulp fiction schlock that you want from a Wolfenstein game. You aren't playing this game for some philosophical meditation on the horrors of war. You're playing it to blow up Nazi wizards and stop mad scientists. So when you first arrive, the town's heavily contested, but I mean the Nazis are clearly winning. The local resistance is getting their asses kicked in brutal crackdowns, and a lot of the regular citizens are just terrified, hoping the occupation will end soon. There's even this armored zeppelin just hovering right over the Midtown district, constantly reminding you that the bad guys are in charge. And as you run around the map, you interact with two different resistance factions. You have the Kreisau Circle, who are your run-and-gun guerrilla fighters trying to take the city back by force, and then you have the Golden Dawn, a group of scholars who are deeply obsessed with studying the Thule civilization that originally created the medallion. You take missions from both groups, and these missions branch out from the open hub area into these linear levels like a hospital, a farm, a church, a cannery, and eventually a paranormal base and a castle.
Please, get me out of here. The Nazis are going to kill me.
And the interesting part of this narrative setup is how the city actually changes over time. Like, the city doesn't just stay a boring static map, because as you progress through the story and mess up the Nazis' plans, things in town become stranger and stranger. Early on, you're just fighting regular military patrols in the streets, but as the Nazis dig deeper into the Black Sun, the veil between realities starts to tear. Suddenly, those regular soldiers are replaced by heavily armed super soldiers, insane supernatural creatures, and magic-wielding SS officers. It gives you this fantastic tangible sense of progression. You can actually feel the situation deteriorating and getting more chaotic the further you get into the game. Also, for the hardcore lore nerds out there, this game's still kinda considered canon within the modern machine games timeline. This is actually the game where they first introduce Caroline Becker, who leads the Kreisau Circle here and goes on to be an extremely important character in the New Order and the New Colossus. Plus, you get the return of classic villains like Wilhelm Deathshed Strass and the chain-gun-wielding meat tank himself, Hans Gross. You even run into Hans in a bar fight halfway through the game, where he literally punches a dude and then casually hits you with a Guten Tag. So yeah, the story isn't gonna win any Oscars, and BJ himself has the personality of a cardboard compared to how they wrote him in the New Order, but as an excuse for shooting bad guys, the narrative does exactly what it needs to do. Moving on to the visuals and the overall art style, and this is where things get really interesting from a technical perspective. So, it runs on a heavily modified version of the id Tech 4 engine. For those who don't know, that's the exact same engine that powered Doom 3 and Quake 4. But Raven didn't just copy-paste the code, they actually did some serious under-the-hood modifications to modernize it for 2009. Like, they added depth of field, soft shadowing, and a whole lot of post-processing effects to make it pop. And more importantly, they integrated the Havok physics engine to handle all these rigid body dynamics and animations. So looking at it today, I feel like the art direction really carries these dated graphics. The environments are moody, with narrow streets, propaganda posters plastered everywhere, and secret sewer entrances hiding rebel bases. But what really stands out here is how the game handles that whole other dimension. So you have this medallion which lets you step halfway into the Black Sun dimension. And when you activate the veil, the entire color palette instantly shifts. The grays and browns of the city are washed away by this sickly green and blue filter. But it's way more than just a cheap Instagram filter. The engine literally changes the spatial reality of the map. Hidden doorways suddenly glow red. Enemy weak spots light up like Christmas trees, and you can even see exploding barrels through walls. And you also see these weird slug-like creatures called Geists just casually swimming through the air, feeding on pools of raw Black Sun energy. It's an incredibly striking visual effect that totally changes the whole vibe of the game. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you and say the game looks flawless today. It definitely has that 2000s bloom where everything looks a little too shiny, almost like someone rubbed Vaseline all over the camera lens. And if you look really closely at the textures, especially on the PC version, you can see some serious compression artifacts. But honestly, when you're in a chaotic firefight blasting fools with a particle cannon, you really don't notice any blurry textures. The visual feedback of the weapons, the blood spatter, and the over-the-top death animations make the game an absolute joy to look at. Plus, the enemy designs get completely wild later in the game. You go from shooting standard blonde dudes in grey uniforms to fighting mutated biological experiments that look like they crawled straight out of Resident Evil. The art style perfectly captures that transition from historical warfare into pure comic book madness. Alright, let's get to the core of the video, the gameplay. Because if there's one single reason why you need to go back and play this game, it's the combat. I'll just say it right now, the gunplay in Wolfenstein 2009 is outrageously good. Like, it has some of the most satisfying and punchy shooting mechanics I've ever experienced in an FPS game. Raven understood exactly how to make weapons, and they absolutely nailed the feedback loop of aiming, shooting, and watching bad guys drop. So you basically start off with your standard, historically accurate World War II hardware. You've got the MP40, the Kar 98 bolt-action rifle, and also the MP43 assault rifle. And these conventional weapons feel great. They have a real kick to them. The sound design is incredibly loud and punchy, and popping a Nazi in the head with the Kar 98 feels really good. But obviously this is a Wolfenstein game, so you aren't going to be stuck using normal guns for very long. About a third of the way through the campaign, the game says "F*** it" and starts handing you these crazy science fiction weapons, and that's when the gameplay goes from good to absolutely amazing. First you get the particle cannon, which literally shoots a beam of highly concentrated energy that completely disintegrates biological matter. Then you get the Tesla gun, which lets you go full Emperor Palpatine. And finally you get the absolute king of the arsenal, the Leichenfaust 44. This thing is basically a gravity cannon powered by Black Sun energy. It's completely OP, utterly ridiculous, and so much fun to use. But the guns are only half of the combat. The other half is that medallion and the veil powers. Over the course of the game, BJ finds these special crystals that he jams into the medallion, permanently unlocking 4 different dimensional states. We already talked about the default veil vision, which makes you run faster, jump further, and see secrets. But then you get Mire, which is essentially a bullet time effect. Next is Shield, which is exactly what it sounds like. And finally you get Empower, which channels that other dimension energy directly into whatever gun you're holding. When it's active, your bullets do way more damage and can actually shoot straight through cover and energy shields. But what makes this system so genius is that you can activate multiple powers at the same time. Like you can trigger Mire, Shield, and Empower all at once and basically become an invincible time-manipulating god of death. The catch is that using these powers drains your veil energy, which you have to constantly refill by finding energy pools scattered around the environment. If you stack all your powers at once, your energy meter will completely drain in like few seconds. So the combat is fast-paced and tactical. You're constantly managing your energy, deciding when to pop a specific power, and figuring out which gun works best for the situation. And you're gonna need those powers because the enemy variety in this game forces you to use them. Like you aren't just fighting regular grunts. You run into scribes, who are these annoying wizards that move at insane speeds and project shields around the heavy soldiers. Then you have heavy troopers walking around with their own particle cannons, and skeletons that will rush you and try to melt your face off. And the boss fights? Holy f***, the boss fights are actually pretty awesome. Like you fight a guy named Victor who turns into a flesh monster, or fight a giant insect called the Queen Geist. And the final boss fight against Hans Gross makes you constantly switch between all 4 of your powers while dodging his attacks in a multi-phase arena battle. It's just pure adrenaline-pumping fun. Now I can't talk about the gameplay without bringing up the black market. because instead of just finding weapon upgrades lying around, the game has a proper economy. Scattered throughout the world are these secret black market hideouts run by two brothers, Anton and Stefan. And as you explore the city and complete missions, you find bags of gold and you use that to buy upgrades for guns and powers. But here's the catch, you can't just buy whatever you want. To even unlock the right to buy certain weapon upgrades, you have to find hidden briefcases of intel. And to unlock power upgrades, you gotta find these rare hidden books called Tomes of Power. But even if you find all the intel and all the tomes, you still run into a financial problem. The devs actually hard-coded like a permanent economic deficit into the game. So if you add up the cost of every single upgrade in the black market, it comes out to exactly $72,750. But if you 100% the game, the maximum amount of money you can possibly earn is only $58,050. That means it's mathematically impossible to fully upgrade your entire arsenal in a single playthrough. So you're basically forced to specialize. Like you gotta decide if you wanna fully max out your MP40 and your shield power, or if you wanna save up and dump all your cash into making the particle cannon as lethal as possible. And because of this scarcity, you should absolutely never ever waste your gold buying regular ammo. Because like ammo's everywhere but gold is finite. If you waste money on bullets, you're screwing yourself out of permanent weapon attachments. So overall the gameplay is actually really nice. So how long does it actually take to beat this thing? Well, it really depends on how you like to play your shooters. If you're the kind of person who just wants to run and gun, ignoring collectibles and side missions and just mainlining the story, you can probably blast through the campaign in about 8 hours. However, if you actually want to engage with the mechanics, want to explore the city, hunt down hidden gold bags, find intel documents, locate the Tomes of Power, and help out the factions with their side objectives, you're looking at like 15 or maybe even 20 hours. And you're gonna be spending a lot of that time navigating the streets. This is where I got a bit annoyed because you do have to do a fair amount of backtracking through areas you have already cleared. And because the city's constantly repopulating with tougher and tougher Nazi patrols, you're gonna get into a lot of random street fights. And if you hate backtracking, you might find the pacing a little dragged out. And as for the difficulty, the game gives you a pretty wide spectrum. On the normal setting, the game's a total breeze. You have a regenerating health system, so if you take damage, just hide behind cover for a few seconds and you're good to go. But if you crank it up to the hard settings like do or die or uber difficulty, the game becomes genuinely challenging. The enemies hit way harder, they flank you faster, and those heavy troopers will melt your health bar in like 2 seconds flat. On higher difficulties, you absolutely cannot survive without mastering the powers. But like the difficulty curve scales really nicely alongside your weapon upgrades, so the game always feels tough but fair. So what's the final verdict on Wolfenstein 2009? Well, sitting here looking at it today, it's honestly a tragedy that this game's so hard to find. It's a genuine certified hidden gem. Yes, the story is kinda nonsense. Yes, the textures can look a bit blurry, and yes, it involves a lot of backtracking. But none of that matters when you're actually playing it because the core mechanical gameplay loop is just so incredibly fun. The gunplay is tight, the physics make every firefight feel chaotic, and the Veil powers add a layer of tactical depth that completely separates it from every other military shooter of that era. Anyways, that's gonna do it for me today. Let me know down in the comments if you guys ever actually played this one back in the day, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.